Welcome, John. Great to see you.
Thanks, guys. Great to be here. Just great to be here.
And as I was just saying off air, I actually was working as John's receptionist 20 years ago as a temp while I was waiting for my first job to come through in TV news. And
so you learnt the first step of wealth out of the 70s.
I think I missed a few steps, so we need to go over them now.
Now, how does this all work? Tell us, what is the difference between property and real estate?
That's the most important question. And the difference is that real estate is the land. And the only component that actually grows is the land. Land appreciates, buildings depreciate. And that's what I wrote 20 years ago, and it's still exactly the same today. The buildings have a life, 30, 40 years. You can depreciate a building in 30, 40 years. But the land will go on forever, and that's the secret in Australian investment. Land has been the best and the highest appreciating asset in Australia. You can't show me anything else. And a perfect example I'll give you is, when I was first buying house and land in 1985, 86, say 30 years ago, I was buying my land for $16 a square metre.
That's a while ago.
That's a while ago. Well, it's 30 years ago.
Okay.
Today, it's worth around about $700 a metre. So it's gone up over 40 times, while the median house price has gone up maybe 10 to 12 times. So the real secret's in the land. And all the billionaires, and I've got 3 Australian property billionaires who've endorsed the book. John, you got it right. Step 1, buy land for growth. And that's all I've really taught the last 20 years. Buy land for growth. Step 2, 3, 4, cash flow, cash flow, cash flow. And then if you get growth and cash flow, you'll get compound growth. And that's what makes people really, really wealthy.
I can feel the energy already as you speak. I know people are watching at home going, quick, what's he saying, what's he saying?
But obviously not just any land.
You've got it. Well, you know, it's actually fairly simple. We have the highest population growth in Australian history, but they're going to the 4 main capitals or 5 main capitals. I only buy land within a certain radius of the capital cities. So, and I'll give you a really good example of this. In 2010-11, you know, the markets cycle as we know. So Sydney, 1998, doubled between 98 and 2003, but between 2003 and 2011, nothing happened in Sydney. The median house price was $520 in 03, $575 in 11. Nothing happened. We came in 11 and bought 400 house and land in the outskirts, 30 to 50 k's from the CBD. And that land has tripled in value, more than tripled in value, while the median house price has barely doubled. And people say to me, oh, but John, you're better off buying in the 5, 10k radius, you know, property does better. No, there's no data on that. The best performing suburb in Sydney in this boom is Edmondson Park, which we bought, you know, heavily into. Why did we buy there? Because of rail, infrastructure, jobs and density.
And that's a really interesting point, because a lot of people aren't personally buying their prime property, their main property for investment. They're buying because it's close to the schools or close to the jobs and etc. And that's probably where they're not the people buying out in those outer rings, and why the whole market's driving in a different way. But you're talking strategic investment for property.
I just talk about, like, you want to buy land, that's number 1. But then you need cash flow, cash flow, cash flow. So you can use to duplicate and then use the growth in one to buy another. You know, and I've got people who read this book 20 years ago who started with $20,000 to $50,000 and now have net assets of $3.5, $4 million. Leveraged off $20,000 to $50,000.
Why did I go off to that job in Coffs Harbour and not stay on his reception desk? I tell you, I would have learned something.
And you know, the most beautiful story, here's a great story. I had a guy he started with me, he read this book 20 years ago, and he was 72 years old. And he came along and said, his name's James Walshbuck. If you're there, James, hi. I love you.
James.
He's 92 now, by the way, 92. But the most positive human being, you know, in my whole life I've ever met. And he came along and said to me, I'm going to join. I'm going to do this. And he said, I've realised I've made all the mistakes. I read your book and I realised I made all the mistakes because in my 50 years, the last 50 years, I've bought and sold 20 properties. And then I realised you were talking about holding and compound growth. I wrote down what I bought, what I sold for, and I realised what they're worth now. And he said, I've made a huge mistake.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest mistake you'll ever make in property, is selling your land, because it's the fastest growing asset in Australia. Now, At 72, he built a portfolio of 6 properties, and that's amazing. You know, and I have people write to me saying, "Oh, John, I'm 45 years old, I haven't got much of an income, it won't work for me." A lot in the mindset, you know, and you need the heart to actually do it. And this is the problem in Australia today. We've got 700 people a day retiring, and 600 are going straight on the pension. You know, this is absurd.
It's not going to be sustainable as we get older.
But we're sitting on the fastest growing asset class in Australian history. And yet people don't know it. It's the land. It's absolutely the land. And in the next 20 years, we've got the highest population growth in Australian history. So get in and get some land in the capital cities. But cash flow, cash flow, cash flow. That's the key.
What cities would you be looking to now? You obviously knew which part of Sydney to go into, 10 years ago or 7 years ago. Where would you be tipping next?
I'm in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth. Today I'm moving big into Brisbane because Brisbane median house price is less than 50% of Sydney. Sydney always leads the market. We've done 1,600 properties in Melbourne in the last 3-4 years. They've all but doubled in value. The outskirts are still going well in Melbourne though, particularly where, the inner north, Doreen, Mernda, in the west, where there's infrastructure going. The southwest is probably a little bit cooked, and the inner is well cooked. But we've done really well in Melbourne. But Brisbane and Adelaide are the areas that we're really looking at, and I've probably fine-tuned my location criteria because the 2 biggest job growth areas in the next 20 years in Australia: healthcare, that's the biggest employer group, so looking at hospitals and things like that, and secondly, education. We have 800,000 foreign students in Australia. 800,000. There's no reason you should have a spare bedroom that's, hasn't got a foreign student in there paying you $300 or $400 a week if you need cash flow. So buy land for growth, cash flow, cash flow, cash flow, and that's tax and
finance. So what are your
finance.
other tips to cash flow? So obviously you'd be looking at making cash flow off that land that you've bought. What are the best ways to do that?
Buy the biggest block of land, put the smallest house on. Pretty simple. But what you want to do is you want to be renting your house at the low end of the market. That's step 2, so that you're not trying to get $1,000 a week when the average wage can justify anyone renting a property at $500 or $600 a week. So all my properties rented about $500 a week. That's step 2. Step 3 is tax. I'm buying property where I'm cash flow positive, but I still get a tax deduction. And that's really tweaking it and getting a depreciation schedule, buying new property. Step 4, most important, finance. So don't ever go with the same bank that's funded your own home. And if you've watched the Royal Commission, you see the banks have been really naughty the last forever. Anyway, they're really naughty. So don't go with the same bank. Go with a separate bank, get an interest-only loan. Don't cross-collateralise your loans, and get a copy of your bank valuation.
Would you be recommending interest-only loans at the moment, given the changes that have been coming through from APRA?
Forget what APRA does. APRA doesn't help investors. APRA really wants to tighten the bank's liquidity. We, as investors, need to look after ourselves. The principal's not tax deductible. The interest is, yes, interest-only loans put cash back in your pocket. So absolutely get them and lock in the rate. Lock it in for 5 years if you can at 4.5%.